when I started really paying attention to the dynamic of what was happening between kids and even bigger, kids and adults. And when I quit my last principalship, the question that I had for myself as an educator, a committed educator to this field, and my mom was an educator for 40 plus years, and so I consider myself, a part of a line. What am I going to leave to this field that matters? What am I going to do about what I know is happening, first of all, other than just kind of shake my head and tisk about it? What am I really going to do? And so I started getting these phone calls, which is part of the reason why I quit my last principalship. People started calling me, asking me to come teach behavior management. And so I started going out. My first year of Rocket, I did a massive amount of behavior management training. Because what people wanted me to do was come teach them the tricks to make kids behave. And I was willing to do some of that for about 6 to 8 months. And then I got clear that I was teaching something I don't believe in. Because I understand that supporting kids in positive behavior is much bigger than figuring out the stuff that you can give them or the stuff you can offer them so they'll do what you want them to do, right? Most people will do what you want them to do if you figure out the stuff to give them that they want. Is this true? So I started teaching this behavior management kind of thing and then realized, and you believe in behavior management in a certain context, but you certainly don't believe that it is the be-all, end-all to supporting young people into being independent, to being thinkers, and to being self-managing, self-controlling young people and adults. You don't believe that. So if that's true, then what do you believe? If you don't believe that, then what do you believe? And so that's where the research started, and that's where this whole thing became, where I was like, well, what are you going to write? What are you going to do? Because the field of education, we always want stuff to be researched and written. Everything's about the writing and the publishing and the this and the that. So what am I going to do with that? And so I started doing some research and started asking myself some really probing questions, and PBF came out of that. Positive behavior facilitation came out of that inquiry and came out of that self-conversation that I was having about what am I going to leave and what is the contribution that I'm going to make to this field that I love so much. Most of my career has been spent with kids who have severe emotional and behavioral challenges. And so I had a bird's eye look at some extensive behaviors that kids were up to and then what adults were doing with some of those behaviors. And some of that stuff is really disturbing, as I'm sure most of you know. Some of the stuff that adults are up to with kids around behavior is challenging stuff. And so PBF got born that way, and this is a question that I ask myself and I ask everybody who I'm in this conversation with, anybody that I talk to about kids and behavior. I want to know what they think about this. And the question that I want you to contemplate and answer is, what is today's prevailing conversation about kids and behavior? What are we saying today about kids and behavior? What are most people saying? What's the prevailing conversation? Just call some stuff out. Kids, yeah. So what's wrong with kids? Mm-hmm. Yeah, kids don't respect adults. Kids are bad.
Standards aren't the same type of standards.
Yeah, the kids don't have the same standards that we used to have. What else? What are people saying? Kids are disrespectful.
They're exposed to a lot more than we
Kids are exposed to a massive amount of stuff. What are we saying about kids and about their behavior specifically? They're bad, they're disrespectful. What other kinds of things do you hear about kids and behavior, about their behavior specifically? Do you hear it's unmanageable? Do you hear that their parents have checked out on them? Do you hear that, this thing that kids are up to we don't understand? What is this 21st century thing that kids are up to? What are we going to do with it other than build more prisons? Right? Because that's one of the responses that we've made, is to build more prisons. Yeah? And so what do you notice about a lot of that conversation? Yeah. Nobody said kids have big potential. Most people aren't saying that. Most people aren't saying kids are reachable. Kids are manageable. Kids have spirit. Kids have soul. Most people aren't saying that stuff. People are saying lots of things that are negative and limit potential. They limit potential. They don't grow potential, they limit potential. And so positive behavior facilitation, and by the way, PBF is not a cousin or relative of PBIS. Most people think that it is. It's not. Right? It's not. This is not a statement against PBIS. It's just to understand that it's a different conversation. Right? And so it's important to understand that if we're going to do what PBS said, which is to facilitate positive behavior, right? The name of the book, the name of the course, the name of this conversation is Positive Behavior Facilitation. And so if you flip that, what do we need to consider if we're going to facilitate positive behavior? What does it mean to facilitate? To make easier. How are we going to make positive behavior easier on kids? To help cause. That you are going to help cause positive behavior in kids. You're going to actually create that. You're going to help cause it. And to assist the progress of. How are we going to do that? And so one of the things that we must know, we have to know, is that if we're going to facilitate positive behavior, we can't do that in the face of a negative conversation. I'm going to say that again in case you missed it. That if indeed we are going to facilitate positive behavior, we can't do that via the mechanism of a negative conversation. The conversation, the tools, the skill set has got to be through a positive lens. That means what? You'd have to talk about kids positively. You'd have to talk about yourself and kids positively. You'd have to talk about the interventions positively because you are trying to create an outcome. And science and research tells us that if you want to do that, if you want to create a particular thing, then you have to be coming via that thing. You can't have this thing over here called negative conversation and then expect the kid to respond to that positively. Because guess what? You guys already know this. The kids know who feels a way about them. You know that already. Kids know when they're in the presence of a person who feels positively about them, and they know when they're in the presence of a person who feels negatively about them. Even if that hasn't been said directly, they know it. How do they know it? Because they can what? Feel it. So the notion that a 5-year-old can't feel how you feel about them is a lie. Yes, they can. A 6-year-old, a 7-year-old can feel how the adults in his environment feels about him. And what's the conversation that they're having around him. So it's a very different conversation to say, this is a boy with a high spirit, and this is a boy with a big soul, versus this is a boy whose behavior is just out of control and unmanageable. Those are two very different conversations, aren't they? They create a different thing. They help cause a different thing. They make another thing happen. What do you think you're hearing me say thus far? I see a lot of heads nodding. What are you hearing? And that's been researched, hasn't it? That's not anything new or hocus pocus. It's been researched that if you want a particular thing, right, if you wanted something positive, that kids respond to expectation and they respond to energy. That's been studied, right? What are you hearing?
The same thing, positiveness breeds positive. Students do know when you don't like them. They come to me all the time and say such and such doesn't like me. Well, how do you know? It's how she responds to me. She's unfair. She's this or that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of communication that's nonverbal, isn't there? A massive amount of communication, not because you're going to walk up to a kid and say, I don't like you. But the kid can figure it out. There's a lot of things that go into an exchange so people can figure out energetically, how do you feel about me? What do you think about me? And then how does that drive what you'll do with me? So positive behavior facilitation flies in the face of a lot of conversations, guys. It is not about trying to figure out the right structure of rewards to make kids do what you want. It's not that. Not that that's bad. That has its place. That has its place. But there's a bigger thing that we get to take a look at. There's a bigger thing. I told the story once of a kid, I had 17, who was on his way to the Navy, and he came to my school, and he says, oh, are you going to throw me a pizza party because I came to school 3 times a week on time? No, I'm not. Because you're about to head out of the door, and you're 17 and on the way to the Navy. Do you think that the person who runs the submarine man is going to be standing by the door, here's some pizza for you got up on time? That's not going to work like that. There's something internal that you have to develop that lets you know coming to school on time is a good idea. But guess what? He didn't come out of the womb asking for pizza. Somebody conditioned him into that. Somebody conditioned him into thinking that the way to address positive behavior is to make sure you get things, you get tangible things, so you will perform. And most people will perform for what they want. And so positive behavior facilitation flies in the face of a lot of the conversations that are out there because it says there's a bigger thing we get to work with. Rewards have its place, and there's a bigger thing. So what do we want to consider? What positive behavior facilitation believes is that if you're going to do this thing well, if you're going to facilitate positive behavior in other people, it doesn't just have to be kids. People hear this conversation like, oh, I know I'm supposed to be thinking about kids, but I'm thinking about my colleagues. Guess what? This is human behavior stuff, guys. We talk about it in the container of kids because that's who we work with. That's, we're educators, most of us, that's what we're up to. But this is human behavior stuff. So you can better believe that all of this applies when you're talking about going back to your office, dealing with some of your colleagues who have challenges. All of this applies. We just happen to be talking in the context of children. Does this make sense? So what PBF believes, guys, is that if we're going to do this well, you must be well equipped. You must be well equipped. I was teaching this class once, and the person said, oh, I get it, you want to arm us. No. It's not about arming you, because if PBF is arming you, then that means I'm offering you some what? Weapons. And PBF does not believe that we are at war with children. You hear that something? Have you ever heard that? That whole thing about we're going to a battleground and we're going to fight it with the kid. PBF doesn't believe that. Again, positive conversation, right? That we are there supporting kids. We are there supporting and facilitating a particular thing. However, we understand that if we're going to do this well, we must be well equipped. That means that you must have a set of what? Tools that support you in having this turn out. So what are the tools of PBF? This is the foundation of the curriculum, guys. When we teach the class, we spend the bulk of the curriculum really exploring these 6